The rain tapped gently against the windows, a rhythmic patter that I couldn't hear but could see. Raindrops raced down the glass, leaving trails like tiny rivers. This was my sanctuary, a small house tucked away in a quiet Dublin suburb, where the shadows danced on the walls under the flickering light of my favorite reading lamp. I cherished the silence. It was a constant companion in my world of vibrant textures and muted whispers. I had spent the day at the library, losing myself in the sea of books that never judged, only offered solace. Books were my friends, their words a tapestry I could weave in my mind. I pulled off my rain-soaked coat, hung it by the door, and glanced around the living room, taking in the familiar sight, the neatly stacked bookshelves, the worn but comfortable couch, the scent of old paper mingling with the faint aroma of the tea I'd left brewing in the kitchen. Ethan, my new neighbor, had stopped by earlier, dropping off a package that had been mistakenly delivered to his door. There was something about him, a strange intensity in his eyes that unsettled me. I pushed the thought aside, chalking it up to nerves. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling as it shook the trees lining the street. As I settled into my evening routine, a flicker of unease crept in. I paused, feeling the vibration of the refrigerator humming gently in the kitchen, the only company I had. A shadow flitted at the edge of my vision, but when I turned, nothing was there. Just shadows playing tricks in the dim light. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling, but the silence felt heavier tonight, like it was holding its breath. The unease lingered as I moved through the house, checking the windows and doors as I always did before settling down for the night. The storm showed no signs of abating, casting my home in a veil of shadows and echoes. I flicked the light switch in the hallway, a quick flash, then darkness. Another power outage, typical in this weather. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to stay calm, reaching for the flashlight I kept in the kitchen drawer. As I navigated my way back to the living room, the beam of light swept across the floor, illuminating something out of place, a book lying open on the coffee table. I was certain I had left it on the shelf. The pages fluttered slightly, caught in the breeze from the drafty window. I approached cautiously, a chill creeping up my spine. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hands, trying to remember if I had forgotten moving it. In the kitchen, I noticed the back door was slightly ajar, the lock hanging loose. Panic flared, a visceral reaction that twisted my stomach. I checked it every night. I was sure of it. I secured the lock and turned, scanning the room, searching for signs that I wasn't alone. Was this the storm's doing? My mind raced, recalling Ethan's unusual interest in my routine, his intense gaze. A nagging thought clawed at the edges of my mind. Was someone here with me? As the house creaked under the weight of the storm, I realized that tonight, silence might not be my friend. The night was growing colder, and I could feel the chill seeping through the walls as I hurried to light candles around the house. Their flickering flames cast long shadows that seemed to dance across the room, a ballet of light and darkness. I shivered, more from the creeping unease than the cold. I found myself staring at the open book, the faint smell of damp paper hanging in the air. It was an old favorite, a mystery novel with a missing detective. My mind whirled with possibilities as I recalled Ethan's peculiar interest in my habits. The realization struck me, this was not just a storm. Someone was deliberately unsettling my world, turning my sanctuary into a place of uncertainty. My heart pounded as I returned to the kitchen, my eyes falling on a note pinned to the refrigerator. It hadn't been there earlier. The words, scrawled in a hurried, jagged hand, read, "I see you." Fear sliced through me, sharp and undeniable. There was no mistaking it now, someone was here. Adrenaline surged through my veins, propelling me into action. I grabbed my phone, intending to call for help, but the signal was dead, likely due to the storm. I knew I had to secure the house, rely on my instincts and senses to navigate this dark, silent game. The house was no longer a refuge, but a maze where I was both the hunter and the hunted. I moved quickly through the house, my senses heightened, every nerve alert. My footsteps were silent on the hardwood floors as I focused on the vibrations and the slight shifts in air currents. My mind raced through the possibilities, formulating a plan. If someone was here, they would have to reveal themselves eventually. I grabbed a heavy book from the shelf, testing its weight in my hand. It wasn't much, but it would do in a pinch. I knew every inch of this house, every creak and shadow, every spot where the floorboards whispered secrets. I could use that knowledge to my advantage. As I passed the hallway mirror, a reflection caught my eye, a shadow that shouldn't have been there. My heart hammered in my chest, and I felt a surge of fear and determination. I turned slowly, clutching the book tightly, prepared to defend my home. In the silence, I thought of all the stories I'd read, tales of courage and survival, where the protagonists faced their fears head-on. I could do this, I had to. The note was a taunt, a challenge to see how far I would go to protect what was mine. The power flickered back on, a brief flash of light illuminating the house, then darkness again. It was enough to show me the truth. I wasn't alone, and the night was far from over. I steeled myself for the confrontation to come, ready to face the shadows and the unseen threat lurking in my home. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, the wind howling like a distant predator. Inside, the house felt like a living thing, every creak and groan a whisper of tension. I moved carefully, keeping to the shadows, aware of every vibration beneath my feet. Ethan was here somewhere, his presence a ghostly weight in the air. I had often marveled at the way sound moved through the world, how it shaped and defined it for others. For me, it was different. My senses had adapted, heightened, filling the void with sight and touch. I had learned to read the world differently, and now, in the silence, I could feel him. Ethan was near, his intentions hanging in the air like a storm cloud. As I approached the living room, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere, the faintest tremor in the floorboards, a subtle change in the air's movement. I paused, every instinct on high alert. Then, a flash of movement caught my eye, a shadow slipping through the doorway. I followed, my heart a steady drumbeat in my chest. The dim light made the house feel like a labyrinth, each turn revealing new corners to be navigated. I could feel his presence, an invisible thread connecting us, and I knew he was playing a game of cat and mouse. But this was my territory, and I was determined not to let fear control me. I moved stealthily through the house, following the shadow into the attic. The air was thick with dust, and the wooden beams creaked underfoot as I climbed the narrow stairs. My pulse raced, each step bringing me closer to the truth. In the dim light, I could see Ethan's makeshift hideout, a collection of photographs and notes pinned to the walls, each one documenting my daily life. The realization hit me, he had been watching for weeks, learning my routines, my habits, my vulnerabilities. This was more than a random act of violence, it was an obsession. I felt a surge of anger, a fire igniting within me that burned away the fear. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I would not let him take that from me. I gathered my thoughts, formulating a plan. I would use his arrogance against him, turn his obsession into a trap of my own making. I picked up a photo from the floor, a snapshot of me in the garden, oblivious to the watchful eyes behind the camera. It was a reminder of everything I stood to lose and everything I was determined to protect. I set the photo back down, careful not to disturb the eerie shrine Ethan had built. As I descended the stairs, the resolve solidified within me. I would lead him into the basement, where the darkness was complete, and the echoes of silence were my allies. There, I would confront him, using the shadows and his obsession as my weapons. The basement was dark and foreboding, a place where shadows pooled and the air felt thick with anticipation. I had spent years filling it with forgotten boxes and memories, its labyrinthine layout familiar to me but treacherous for an outsider. It was the perfect setting for what I had planned. I moved quietly, setting up small distractions and traps using whatever I could find, a line of string, a pile of old books balanced precariously. Each step was a calculated decision, each shadow a potential ally. I could feel Ethan drawing closer, his presence a prickling awareness on my skin. I took a deep breath, calming my racing heart. The silence around me felt alive, like an entity waiting to see what would unfold. I crouched in the darkness, clutching the heavy book I had taken earlier. My senses reached out into the void, feeling the vibrations, detecting the subtle changes in the air. The door creaked open, and I heard the faint rustle of clothing as Ethan stepped inside. He was overconfident, assuming I was just another victim to be cowed into submission. But this was my territory, and I was ready to defend it. I waited, letting him move deeper into the maze, before revealing myself, the hunter now becoming the hunted. Ethan turned at the sound of my movement, his eyes narrowing as he caught sight of me. I could see the surprise flicker across his face, a crack in the mask of control he had worn. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough. I stepped forward, the book raised like a shield, my voice steady as I addressed him. This is my home. You have no power here. My words were met with silence, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the realization that he had underestimated me. He lunged, anger driving him forward, but I was ready. I sidestepped, guiding him into the web of traps I had laid. The string caught at his feet, the books tumbled down, and he stumbled, his arrogance turning against him. In the ensuing chaos, I seized the opportunity, striking out with the book, catching him off guard. He fell, and I was on him, pinning him to the ground, my adrenaline surging as I fought to keep him there. As the storm raged outside, the power flickered back on, flooding the basement with light. The sudden brightness was disorienting, but it was a beacon of hope, a sign that this nightmare was ending. I grabbed my phone, dialing the authorities with trembling fingers, my voice firm as I reported the intrusion. The ordeal had shaken me, but as I waited for help to arrive, a sense of calm settled over me. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, the silence no longer a threat but a testament to my resilience. Ethan was subdued, his plans thwarted, and as I watched him taken away, I knew I had reclaimed my sanctuary. The dawn broke, casting the world in a new light. I stood at the window, watching the rain subside, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin. The night had tested me, but I had found strength in my silence, a power that would guide me through whatever challenges lay ahead. I woke with a start, my heart pounding in the silent darkness. The familiar creaks and groans of our old house seemed amplified, echoing through the still night air. I listened intently, straining to separate the usual sounds from the unusual. There was again the unmistakable sound of footsteps softly padding along the wooden floorboards. My first thought was of Jake, my teenage son, but a quick glance at the clock, 2:13 a.m., told me otherwise. He wouldn't be up at this hour. Carefully, I slipped out of bed, making my way to the door. Peeking out, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving across the hallway, an unfamiliar silhouette that sent a jolt of fear through me. Instinctively, I retreated, my mind racing. Someone was in the house. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I reached for the phone, only to remember it was charging downstairs in the kitchen. Quietly, I crept down the hallway to Jake's room. He was sound asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking outside. I shook his shoulder gently. Jake, wake up. We have to be quiet. His eyes flickered open, confusion giving way to alertness as he registered the urgency in my voice. I motioned for silence, gesturing toward the hallway. Together, we listened as the soft footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. The realization was chilling. We weren't alone. Fear gnawed at me, but there was no time to dwell on it. We needed a plan, and fast. We quickly barricaded ourselves in Jake's room, shoving his desk and chair against the door. My heart was pounding in my chest as I whispered, Jake, I need you to stay calm. Can you check the security cameras? Jake nodded, his fingers nimble on the keyboard of his laptop. Within moments, he had pulled up the live feed from our home's cameras. What we saw on the screen made my stomach drop, 3 masked figures moving with precision, disabling our cameras one by one. Their movements were coordinated and methodical, as if they knew exactly what they were doing. Their silence was unnerving. They communicated only through gestures, a silent language we couldn't comprehend. Mom, Jake whispered, fear in his voice, they're cutting the wires. They know how to bypass the system. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I had to stay strong for Jake. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to find a way to get help. Do you have your phone? Jake checked his pockets, shaking his head. It's downstairs. I was charging it too. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. The landline was in the kitchen, but the intruders were already moving in that direction. We couldn't risk going downstairs, not with them so close. We need a distraction, I said, thinking aloud, something to draw them away from the stairs so we can get to the phone. Jake's eyes lit up with an idea. What if we use the house speakers? I can access them from here and play something loud in the living room. It was risky, but it was our best shot. I nodded, do it. Jake typed furiously, and moments later, loud music blared from the speakers downstairs, echoing through the house. The intruders paused, their attention drawn to the sudden noise. It was our chance. As the music blared downstairs, we seized the opportunity. I took Jake's hand, and we moved quietly, sticking close to the walls as we made our way down the hallway. My heart was in my throat, the fear palpable with every step. We had to be swift and silent, shadows in our own home. We reached the stairs and paused, listening intently for any signs that the intruders were still distracted. The music was loud and jarring, masking our movements as we descended. The plan was simple: get to the kitchen, call for help, and find a way out. But simple plans often go awry, and my anxiety gnawed at the edges of my resolve. Jake squeezed my hand, his expression determined. We reached the kitchen, and I picked up the landline, dialing the police with shaky fingers. The line rang, but before anyone answered, the call was abruptly cut off. I cursed under my breath. They had cut the phone lines too. Jake pointed toward the basement door. "Mom, the basement. We can hide there and try to figure something out." The basement offered a temporary refuge, a place to regroup. We slipped through the door and down the steps, closing it quietly behind us. In the dim light, I could see the shelves lined with boxes and old electronics. I racked my brain for ideas, anything to help us outsmart the intruders. Jake was already at the workbench, examining the old electronics with a thoughtful expression. "We can use this stuff," he said. "If we can power it up, maybe we can send a distress signal or something." His resourcefulness amazed me. "Do it. I'll keep watch." As Jake worked, I peered through the small basement window. The fog outside seemed thicker, swallowing the night and isolating us further. I could hear the faint, muffled sounds of footsteps above, and my heart pounded in my chest. We were running out of time. Jake's hands moved with urgency, connecting wires and fiddling with switches. I marveled at his focus, even in the face of danger. As he worked, I searched through the boxes stacked along the walls, hoping to find anything useful. My fingers brushed against something hard and flat, old newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. I skimmed the headlines, my eyes catching phrases like neighborhood dispute and community uproar. "What is this?" I muttered, holding the clippings up to the dim light. The story spoke of a dispute from years ago, one that had apparently left lingering tensions among some of the neighborhood families. Could this be connected to the intruders? It seemed too coincidental. "Mom, I think I've got it," Jake said, breaking my train of thought. He held up a makeshift device, a collection of wires and components that looked like a relic from the past. "If we can just get this signal strong enough, it might reach someone." I nodded, impressed and hopeful. "Let's try it." "We don't have much time." Jake flipped a switch, and a faint hum filled the basement. It was a small victory, a glimmer of hope in the oppressive darkness. As we listened to the hum, I wondered about the neighbors. Who could we trust? The clippings hinted at old grudges, but surely someone would help. A sudden sound from above made us freeze. The basement door creaked open, the shadowy outline of an intruder visible against the faint light. My heart stopped. We had to act fast. "We need to set a trap," I whispered to Jake, urgency in my voice. "Lure them down here and lock them in." Jake nodded, understanding the plan instantly. It was a gamble, but it was our only chance. We prepared to face whatever came next. The tension in the air was thick as Jake and I worked silently, setting up our trap in the basement. We rearranged boxes and shelves to create a makeshift barricade, hoping it would slow the intruders enough for us to lock them in. My heart raced as we moved with quiet urgency, each creak of the floorboards above reminding us of the danger closing in. Jake positioned himself near the old electronics, ready to activate a loud noise that would draw the intruders down. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. We needed to lure them in, and the only way to do that was to make them believe they had cornered us. "Ready?" Jake whispered, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. I nodded. "Now." Jake triggered the device, and a piercing alarm blared through the basement. The sound was deafening, echoing off the concrete walls. Footsteps above paused, then hurried toward the source of the noise. The door creaked open wider, and I caught a glimpse of a masked figure starting down the stairs. We retreated to our hiding spots, waiting for the intruders to take the bait. My pulse pounded in my ears, each second stretching into an eternity. As the intruders descended, I prepared to spring the trap. The moment they were far enough in, Jake and I moved swiftly, shoving the barricade into place and slamming the door shut. Breathing heavily, we leaned against the door, holding it closed with every ounce of strength. The intruders were trapped, their frustrated shouts muffled by the thick wood. "Stay strong, Jake," I whispered. "We're almost through this." With the intruders contained, I quickly called the police from Jake's laptop using a backup internet connection he had rigged. Relief washed over me, but the night wasn't over yet. We had to face the lead intruder, the one who had guided the others with such precision. We could hear them attempting to break free, their voices filled with anger and desperation. I knew we couldn't hold the door forever. As I leaned against the barricade, I noticed a familiar voice among the intruders, a voice I couldn't quite place. Jake, ever resourceful, had managed to hack into the intruders' communication devices, and suddenly, a face appeared on the screen, one of our neighbors, someone I thought we could trust. "Mom," Jake said, shock evident in his voice, "it's Mr. Harris from next door." I felt a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. Mr. Harris had always been kind, yet here he was, orchestrating this invasion. It didn't make sense until I remembered the newspaper clippings and the old neighborhood dispute. He must have believed he was righting some perceived wrong. "Why, Mr. Harris?" I called out, my voice steady but filled with anger. "Why do this to us?" His response was muffled, but I caught snippets about justice and revenge. It was madness, and it had to stop. As the police arrived, their lights flashing through the fog, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The nightmare was ending, and soon, the truth would be brought to light. The police quickly took control of the situation, leading Mr. Harris and his accomplices out in handcuffs. I watched from the porch, Jake by my side, as the flashing lights painted the fog in shades of red and blue. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, the adrenaline fading and leaving me drained. "Mom, it's over," Jake whispered, leaning against me for support. I wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "Yeah, it's over," I replied, though my mind was still reeling from the revelation. Mr. Harris, the neighbor who had always waved hello and offered to help with groceries, had orchestrated a night of terror in our home. The police assured us that they would investigate further, but I knew that the roots of this incident ran deep. The old neighborhood dispute had left scars that festered into resentment and paranoia, leading to this unimaginable night. As I watched the officers talk to Mr. Harris, I realized that he was a man who had lost his way, blinded by a need for revenge. Jake and I went back inside, the house feeling foreign and unfamiliar after the night's events. We sat in the living room, silence settling around us. The fog outside had begun to lift, and with it, the oppressive weight of fear. "We'll be okay," I said softly, mostly to reassure myself. "We'll get through this." Jake nodded, his eyes weary but determined. "We have to tell the others, make sure everyone knows what really happened." In the days that followed, the neighborhood came together, united by the shared experience. We spoke about the past, about misunderstandings and grudges that had lingered too long. It was time to heal and rebuild, to ensure that fear and silence never again ruled our lives. Life slowly returned to normal, though the shadows of that night lingered at the edges of my mind. Jake and I spent the following weeks repairing the damage, both physical and emotional. Our bond grew stronger, forged in the crucible of fear and survival. The neighborhood held a meeting to address the events, bringing everyone together in a way that hadn't happened in years. Stories were shared, grievances aired, and for the first time, it felt like we were truly part of a community. The past's ghosts were finally laid to rest. As we gathered in the community center, I looked around at the familiar faces, each marked by the night in different ways. There was a sense of renewed purpose, a collective understanding that we couldn't let old wounds fester any longer. "I'm sorry," Mr. Harris said, his voice filled with regret. He stood at the front, flanked by officers, his eyes downcast. "I lost sight of what mattered. I let my anger consume me, and I hurt those I considered friends." His apology was met with silence, then cautious acceptance. It would take time, but perhaps, in the end, forgiveness was possible. As the meeting ended, Jake and I walked home, the evening air crisp and clear. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood felt safe again. We were moving forward, taking small steps toward healing and understanding. That night, as I tucked Jake into bed, he smiled up at me, his eyes bright with hope. "We did it, Mom. We're okay." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Yes, we did. And we always will." As I turned off the lights and closed his door, I paused, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. The silent strangers had come and gone, but we were stronger for having faced them. It was a typical Friday evening in Auckland, the kind of night where the rhythm of the rain against the windows could almost lull you into forgetting the world outside. I arrived home from work just as dusk settled over the neighborhood, the streetlights flickering on one by one. Our house, a modest, cozy place filled with memories and hopes, was a sanctuary, a world away from the bustling city center. Inside, the warmth of curry wafted through the air, and I could hear my children, Aisha and Vikram, laughing in the living room as they played a game that I pretended not to understand. My wife, Priya, was in the kitchen, moving gracefully between the stove and the counter. The scene was so ordinary, so comforting, that it was hard to imagine anything could disrupt our peace. Dinner was a pleasant affair, the kind of simple joy that comes from sharing a meal with those you love. We talked about the week, about Aisha's school project on the native birds of New Zealand, and Vikram's latest obsession with rugby. As the rain continued its steady patter, I felt grateful for the life we had built here, for the sense of security that came with routine. After dinner, we settled into the living room, the warmth of the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Priya picked up a book, and I joined the children on the floor, helping Vikram with his model kit. It was a night like any other, wrapped in the comfort of familiarity. But then, just as we were beginning to think about bedtime, there was a knock at the door. It was soft at first, almost tentative, but persistent enough to cut through the tranquility of the evening. I glanced at Priya, who frowned slightly, her eyes questioning, who could it be at this hour? The knock sounded again, louder this time, and I felt a slight chill run down my spine. It was unusual to have visitors this late, especially without any warning. I rose from the floor, motioning for the kids to stay put, and made my way to the door, glancing back at Priya, who nodded reassuringly. As I opened the door, a gust of cool night air swept in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth. Standing there were two men, their faces partially hidden by the shadows cast by the porch light. They looked rough around the edges, dressed in worn jackets and jeans that had seen better days. My heart skipped a beat, something felt off, a gut instinct that screamed at me to be cautious. One of the men stepped forward, his voice gruff yet urgent. "We need to talk to you, Mr. Patel. It's important." I hesitated, unsure of what to say or do. The kids' laughter from the living room felt miles away now, as if part of another world. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I know you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, calm. The man's expression hardened. "You're the one we're looking for. We need answers about what you've been doing." His words were thick with accusation, tinged with a desperation that made my stomach twist. I could feel Priya's presence behind me, her hand lightly touching my back, a silent signal of solidarity. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, forcing myself to maintain eye contact, even as my mind raced through possibilities. Who were these men, and what did they want with us? The second man leaned closer, his voice a low growl, no mistake. "You're hiding something, and we're not leaving until we find it." Fear settled like a stone in my gut as I realized we were no longer safe in our own home. The walls that had once promised security now felt like a trap. The air felt thick with tension as I closed the door, locking it as a futile barrier against the storm that had just arrived on our doorstep. I turned to Priya, her eyes wide with concern, and whispered, "Get the kids. We need to hide." Priya nodded and hurried to Aisha and Vikram, who were still blissfully unaware of the looming danger. I scanned the room for anything that could serve as a weapon or a distraction, my mind racing with possibilities. My heart pounded in my chest, a relentless drumbeat echoing the urgency of our predicament. "Dad, what's going on?" Vikram asked, sensing the shift in atmosphere as Priya guided them toward the hallway. Aisha clutched her brother's hand, looking between us with wide, questioning eyes. We're playing a game, I said, trying to inject some levity into my voice. We need to be very quiet and hide, okay? Priya and I led them to the small storage room at the back of the house, a space cluttered with boxes and old furniture. It was cramped and dark, but it would have to do. The intruders' voices could be heard outside, their conversation a muffled argument that I couldn't quite decipher. Once inside, I pulled the door shut, leaving it slightly ajar so I could hear what was happening. My mind was a whirl of fear and frustration. Why us? What did they want? The questions clawed at me, demanding answers that I couldn't provide. Outside, the men were still arguing, their words now loud enough to catch fragments of, "Are you sure it's him? This doesn't feel right." Priya squeezed my hand, her strength a grounding force amidst the chaos. "We'll get through this," she whispered, determination etching her features even in the dim light. But as the seconds ticked by, I knew we had to think of a plan before things spiraled further out of control. Time seemed to stretch endlessly in the cramped storage room. I strained to catch every word from the intruders, hoping for some clue, some indication of their intentions. Their voices were growing more agitated, the tension between them palpable. They were arguing about me, about us, and the reasons for their invasion. "You said this was the place," one of them snapped, his voice edged with doubt and frustration. "Yeah, but I didn't expect a family," the other replied, sounding uncertain now, the bravado from earlier slipping away. The realization hit me, they weren't just here for money or valuables. This was personal, fueled by some mistaken belief or misunderstanding. But what could it be? What had led them to our door on this rain-soaked night? Priya leaned closer, her breath warm against my ear as she whispered, "We need to find a way out. We can't just sit here and wait." I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. The back door led to the garden, but it would mean risking exposure. Still, it might be our only chance to escape and find help. I carefully opened the storage room door a little wider, just enough to peer into the hallway. The men were still in the living room, their attention divided as they argued. This was our moment, we had to move quickly. "Stay close and stay quiet," I instructed Priya and the kids, gesturing for them to follow. The plan was simple, get to the back door, slip into the garden, and make a run for it. But every step felt like a gamble, the stakes impossibly high. As we crept down the hallway, the house seemed to hold its breath with us. Each creak of the floorboards sounded like a shout in the silence, but we pressed on. With each step, I felt the weight of responsibility. My family's safety depended on my next move. We reached the kitchen, the back door just a few feet away, and I could almost taste freedom. But a sudden crash from the living room stopped us cold, a reminder that danger was still very real and very near. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the house, sharp and sudden, as if the tension had finally reached a breaking point. Priya and I exchanged a look. We had no time to hesitate. The back door was our only option now. "Go, go!" I whispered urgently, pushing the door open as quietly as I could. The rain was still falling steadily, a curtain of water that would obscure us from view as we made our escape. Aisha and Vikram clung to Priya, their eyes wide with fear, but trusting us to lead them to safety. We slipped out into the garden, the rain soaking us instantly. I turned to close the door behind us, hoping to buy us a few precious seconds. As we moved through the shadows, I glanced back at the house, its familiar outline now alien and menacing. Suddenly, a shout came from inside, "They're gone!" The intruders had discovered our absence. My heart pounded in my chest, we had to move faster. The garden gate loomed ahead, a narrow escape route that would lead us to the neighbor's property and, hopefully, safety. But as we reached the gate, a figure emerged from the darkness, blocking our path. It was one of the intruders, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. "You're not getting away that easy," he snarled, advancing toward us. I positioned myself between him and my family, every instinct screaming to protect them. Priya was beside me, her eyes fierce. "We're not what you think. Please, just let us go." He hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face, and in that moment of doubt, I lunged forward, using every ounce of strength to push him aside. "Run!" I shouted, urging Priya and the kids through the gate. As we raced across the neighbor's lawn, I could hear the intruder behind us, his footsteps splashing through the puddles. The rain was both ally and enemy, concealing our movements but making every step treacherous. We reached the neighbor's door, pounding on it frantically. "Help! Please, help us!" The neighbor's door swung open, revealing Mrs. Liu, an elderly woman with kind eyes who had always been friendly to us. Her eyes widened at the sight of us, drenched and desperate. "What's going on?" she asked, concern etched into her features. "Please, we're in danger," Priya gasped, glancing over her shoulder as the intruder closed in. Without hesitation, Mrs. Liu ushered us inside, bolting the door behind us. The intruder's fists pounded on the door, the sound resonating through the house. "We need to call the police," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Mrs. Liu nodded, reaching for her phone, and within moments she was relaying the situation to the authorities. The wait felt interminable, every second stretching into eternity as we huddled in the living room, tension thick in the air. The intruder outside continued his assault on the door, but his shouts were now edged with desperation rather than certainty. The police sirens in the distance were a welcome sound, growing louder and more distinct. When the officers arrived, their presence was both a relief and a vindication. The intruder was quickly apprehended, his partner soon joining him in handcuffs. As the police led them away, I caught a glimpse of the men's faces, anger, confusion, and finally resignation. As the officers took our statements, the weight of the night's events began to settle in. I felt a profound sense of gratitude for our safety, for Priya's courage, and for the kindness of a neighbor who had offered us refuge. The police car's flashing lights cast a surreal glow over our street, painting the familiar scene with an unsettling edge. As I stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket provided by Mrs. Liu, I tried to process the chaos of the night. My mind felt like it was moving through fog, each thought sluggish and heavy. Priya was beside me, holding Aisha and Vikram close. The children were silent, their eyes wide and watchful as they absorbed the seriousness of the situation. I knew this night would leave a mark on them, on all of us. The officers spoke to us again, assuring us that we were safe now and that the intruders would be dealt with appropriately. But safety felt like an elusive concept, something fragile that could be shattered at any moment. As the police cars finally drove away, and the neighborhood began to settle back into its usual quiet, Priya and I sat together in the living room, the remnants of fear still clinging to the edges of our consciousness. "We'll get through this," Priya said softly, echoing the promise she had made in the storage room. I nodded, taking comfort in her presence, and the resilience that had seen us through the darkest hours of our lives. Morning light spilled through the windows, bathing our home in a gentle glow that felt almost healing. The world outside was washed clean by the night's rain, and with it came a sense of renewal. As we began the process of cleaning up and setting our house back in order, I found a small note tucked under the front door. My heart skipped a beat as I unfolded it, fearing a threat, but it was just a few words, written hastily. "Sorry. Wrong family." The words were a reminder of how close we had come to disaster and how easily our lives could be turned upside down. But they were also a promise we would not live in fear. Together, we would rebuild and find strength in each other. Looking out into the garden, where the flowers glistened with morning dew, I felt a quiet determination take root. This was our home, our life, and we would protect it fiercely. The dawn promised a new beginning, and we were ready to face it together. Like the story? Hit like and subscribe. See you in the next story popping up on your screen at this exact moment.